Hello and welcome to Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer. I'm Ann Hess. A systematic review led by Dr. Eric Neumann, funded by the National Pork Board's Swine Disease Research Task Force, revealed significant barriers to eradicating porcine epidemic diarrhea virus nationwide. However, biosecurity protocols, feed decontamination, and enhanced surveillance can help reduce transmission and economic losses. Joining us to discuss farm level, research backed PEDv management and to further recognize the task force and others alike are Dr. Neumann with Epi-Insight Limited and Dr. Marisa Rotolo with National Pork Board's Director of Swine Health. Welcome to you both and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Marisa.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Well, before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to remind the audience tuning in, you can post your questions at any time there in the chat, or if you're tuning in via social media, you can post those there in the comments. So I have a question for both of you, but let's start with you, Dr. Neumann. Why is PEDv an industry challenge and a major health concern?
I don't think that'll be my answer to that will be a surprise to anyone, but it's a consequential disease in its own right, just given its impact on farm mortality and the stress and misery that creates for farm workers. So the disease itself is quite consequential and one that people would really rather not have to deal with. Secondly, it represents an incursion into the states, so it's a sort of long-term worry for why do these things happen. And a reminder that we can't sort of let down our guard because the threat from outside the borders is going to remain and we'll have more incursions over time. So one always hates to see these systemic failures of sort of border security and whatever occurred that allow the agent to enter the country. The third reason I think it's quite an important and frustrating disease is simply related to the fact the absence of tools. So when an animal does get infected, it's quite likely to die. It's heavily age dependent, of course, but young pigs, most susceptible population. And when they get infected, a large number of those are going to die. So it's an expensive disease. But because it's a virus and we're dealing with livestock, we don't really have chemotherapeutics to deal with the disease primarily. So we don't have a drug really to directly impact the disease. The best we can do from a treatment standpoint is good care, nutrition, management of the environment, and so forth. But we don't really have a lot of direct treatment so we can apply to an infected animal. They're going to have to manage that themselves.
Sure, all those back to basics. Dr. Rotolo, anything to add to that?
You know, I would just say that PED really challenged our industry to make some changes. We started to take a closer look at our transport biosecurity. We started to take a look at our feed biosecurity. It gave us the opportunity to evolve as an industry. However, it's still a very challenging disease in the sense that we do continue to see high mortality, especially in younger piglets, and we can see higher mortality in late stage finishing. So it's something that continues to challenge us as well as force us to evolve.
Now, I want to touch on these two animal health task force. Dr. Rotolo, explain National Pork Board's role in each one.
Right, so bear with me because I'm going to say the word task force quite frequently in the next couple of minutes. So there is the National Pork Board Swine Disease Research Task Force, which is made up of producers, subject matter experts, academia, and veterinarians. And I manage that as part of my role as Director of Swine Health at National Pork Board. I also co-lead the American Association of Swine Veterinarians PED Elimination Task Force with Dr. Paul Yeske. And how we have set these two task forces up is really we have an open line of communication between the two groups. So the AASV group is mainly made of veterinarians and subject matter experts in the space of PED. And the Pork Board Task Force is our main way to share what the AASV group is doing with producers and get their input to help guide what the AASV group is doing as well. So the other role of the Swine Disease Research Task Force is to identify research priorities based off of challenges that producers are facing every day. And I believe it was last fall, we hosted a PED-focused RFP, or request for proposals, specifically targeted at what are the challenges, what are the questions, what are the gaps that we have related to PED within the swine industry. And those priorities and gaps were identified by both task forces, one of which being a literature review in order to identify those knowledge gaps and what would a PED eradication program look like for the U.S. swine industry.
Yeah, I know we've had Dr. Yeske on quite a few times discussing PED and when can we quit talking about it? When can we overcome this challenge? Dr. Neumann, describe your systematic review at a high level.
Right. Well, I should first just remind people that it wasn't a series of works that I did by myself. Collaborator Dr. Bill Hall in Australia helped conduct the work. Both Bill and I spent a good bit of our early careers in the U.S. in pig production. So we both left the U.S. by the time PED arrived, but we certainly have a long history, both of us, in dealing with TGE practically. So we do share the experience and frustrations of dealing with enteric coronaviruses in pigs that the current U.S. Producers are having to deal with. But the systematic review approach that we undertook was nothing special with regard to technique. It's a tried and tested method. That is, you create quite a general and a wide casting search across the electronic databases that are available of peer-reviewed research, theses, dissertations, and in some cases more gray literature, but most gray literature is based on published literature at some level. So the focus for the systematic review was peer-reviewed literature. So we create the search, we get several thousand, in this case about 2,000 titles back, and these were papers from 1990 forward. We then do a 3-stage filtering process to go through those papers. The first stage is simply to look at the titles and see if they look relevant, because obviously you'll pick up a lot of things in your lit review search that are not going to be relevant and have got picked up because of inadequate search filter. So there's a couple of thousand papers that we started with. We first filter them by a title, as I say. Ones that make it through the title search then get reviewed based on their abstract and whether that looks like they're going to meet the needs of the systematic review criteria based on the abstract. And about 500 of the 2,000 papers made it through that cut. And then after reading the abstracts, we categorize those into 12 different categories, group the papers up, and then do a full-length review of all of them. So in the final analysis, there was about 412 papers we did a full-length review on, divided them into 12 categories, and then went into the effort of trying to summarize and find either key novel bits of information that had maybe not been commonly known, look for common themes, and then ultimately try to extract recommendations across all of the 12 different categories of papers.
That's quite an extensive amount of data that you went through, and I'm sure it took many months to get through all that and find the key nuggets. And when we're looking at that, what are maybe some things that a farm worker can implement to reduce the morbidity and mortality resulting from PED, from that review, from the things you've pulled out from it?
I think some interesting things about this particular systematic review, and we've done a number of them over the years. In this case, we specifically excluded older papers, and we excluded papers related to TGE specifically, though if they were TGE and PED, they were kept in the study. But we tried to hone it as the search as closely as we could to meet the brief of National Pork Board, which was, can you tease apart and understand facts that would be critical to us making a determination of whether eradication is a feasible objective. So there's other papers out there, certainly more than the 2,000 we looked at, but that was the brief, to find things that could support or not support the feasibility of an eradication effort. Another interesting thing about the study was that because of the advent of COVID, which is also a coronavirus, occurring during the time at which the time frame of papers that we were looking at, there was a giant burst of coronavirus-related papers from around 2021 clear up through present. So the number of papers is highly influenced in the last 5 years because not only is PED virus difficult to grow in a laboratory, so is COVID. So in terms of looking for proxy viruses for the human medical researchers to be working on COVID, a good bit of that work was using other proxy viruses, including PED. So there was a massive number of papers on things we wouldn't normally see for livestock diseases around novel vaccine approaches and tried and true vaccine approaches, but also antivirals. And these are sort of the classical chemotherapeutics that we sort of rely on for a number of different human viral diseases, and seeing if simply they'll work for a PED. But the thing that was really outstanding to me was the number of papers related to let's call them herbal extracts or Asian plant-based medicinal products that hope to, or they believed had some antiviral effect. So fully half of the papers that we looked at were related to vaccines, vaccine platforms, and these natural antivirals, and some more pure lab-based chemical antivirals. Setting all of that aside, it was sort of an interesting read to go through that. And there are some nuggets of hope, I think, both in terms of vaccine and even these traditional medicines. The tried and true, I think, lessons that fell out of that were we're going to get to manage this disease much like we do every other disease, and that's dealing with the mundane aspects of people, fomites, biosecurity, understanding transmission vectors, reducing the dose, keeping your own house clean, so to speak, to keep yourself from becoming infected. Because once you get infected, the tools at hand are quite limited to manage that infection on the farm. Farmers today are still using controlled feedback to induce a form of natural immunity in these animals and protect themselves, and maybe try to eliminate the disease from their farm, as well as reduce the chance of becoming infected. But when the animals get infected with this virus, they produce masses of virus that's going to be an overwhelming challenge for most chemotherapeutics or even vaccines, simply based on the fact that they make a lot of virus, and it's going to be overwhelming for the immune system of many pigs. So we're back to the basics in many cases to work through an eradication or control program, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. No silver bullet there. And just really back to some of those biosecurity basics that we've been discussing for some time. Dr. Rotolo, do you have anything to add to that list?
I would say from my perspective, one of the most important things that we can do is work together as an industry and really collaborate as it relates to a potential PED eradication, right? I think we have a lot of information and tools and research out there as it relates to PED. And one of the most important steps that we can take as an industry is to collaborate and work together to move the needle on this pathogen.
So any other examples of PED research that the Swine Disease Research Task Force has funded?
Yes. So as I mentioned, we did host a PED-focused fall RFP last year. And in addition to Dr. Neumann's literature review, we did fund 2 projects on a pen-side test to quickly identify PED on farm. And then in addition to that, we funded a project that was focused on manure management, specifically trying to identify how long PED is infectious in manure products, as well as a literature review focused on manure management as it relates to PED.
As we wrap up our discussion here, I'll leave you with if there's any key takeaways you'd like to leave our audience here today. Dr. Neumann, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I might take just a bit longer than a second to answer this question because still a few points that haven't come out of the discussion. But given the 12 categories that we divided these papers into, might just sort of whiz through those quickly. But airborne transmission, there's a cluster of papers around that. But again, we already knew prior to our review that airborne transmission happened. How consequential it is to maintaining a larger epidemic or pandemic, we don't know, but we certainly know there's some local spread due to aerosol. So can always remember that. Antivirals, we've already talked through that. Biofeedback and purposeful exposure, yeah, a critical cornerstone to how the U.S. industry has chosen to manage this disease. And that certainly comes with some risk. And we also have the issue of viral migration, right? Changing of strains, and to what extent feedback is contributing to that versus helping us manage it. But at the moment, it generates very good immunity for the strain that you believe you have the most risk of having to manage. So biofeedback is probably going to continue to be a cornerstone of the control, but with some risk, of course. Colostrum and management of passive immunity, another hallmark that we learned from TGE management. And certainly that often is going along with biofeedback to generate good quality passive immunity. We know that's a critical step in managing the disease on farms. Feed risk, I haven't really talked about at all because, again, well published, well understood. The supply chains are managing feed risk the best they can. So we know most of what we need to know about risk of feed. So we did not emphasize that a lot in this review. Host resistance and the hope for a resistant pig. Not much happening out there. Half a dozen papers. Experimentally, maybe something a bit interesting, but we're light years away from that having an impact to the industry. Viral inactivation kinetics, chemicals, temperature, whatever. Again, nothing particularly unusual about this virus. Our standard range of chemical inactivation products will work fine for PED as well. And we know the heat kinetics to kill it. So that's going to be part of a larger risk management program. Viral shedding characteristics, again, young pigs shed a lot of virus for longer. Older pigs shed less virus for shorter. Follows the pattern of many, many other diseases. So no secrets there, but we do have some details that we can use to refine sort of maybe weaning strategies, pig movement strategies, how long you leave animals in isolation before they come into a farm, how you manage passive exposure, those sorts of things. Transportation risks we talked about a bit already, and the fact that this virus is associated with manure and can contaminate and move around via fomites. So hygiene and disinfection are going to be part of a control program. And then finally, the role of wildlife. There's a number of papers out there on what other species might get infected with the virus. As it turns out, there is a few, but it does not look to be contributing to long-term persistence of the environment on farms or in the environment. And then the final topic, of course, is vaccines. I'm not without hope for vaccines. They do have a role. It looks like the products are out there, have some effect. But they're not going to be the silver bullet like we had for Ojeski's or pseudorabies, where it was virtually the world's perfect vaccine, had all the right characteristics, and the thing worked. It's going to be unlikely that we get a vaccine that good for PED, but we can hope. But even a partially effective a vaccine can have some contributing effect to control programs. So we'll keep working on that and see where it fits.
A lot to consider there from that review, from feed and fomites and feedback and good colostrum, and even some bright spots as far as not having to deal with maybe wildlife contamination like we're seeing here from avian influenza and some of the other species, and hopefully that vaccine work continues on. Dr. Rotolo, anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I would like to say that most recently at the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan's House of Delegates meeting, we were able to adopt a standard entitled PED Clean, which is intended to be the highest health certification as it relates to your PED health status on farm, as well as a resolution to allow us to explore PED monitored, which would be targeted towards farms that may be positive or may be negative. And so I think that signals a big step by the industry to start talking about PED and using a program like US SHIP or the Swine Health Improvement Plan in order to standardize how we communicate about the health of our herds as it relates to endemic pathogens.
Very good. Dr. Marisa Rotolo with National Pork Board and Dr. Eric Neumann with Epi-Insight Limited. Thank you both so much for being on here and sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Ann.
For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in. For more coverage and conversations on swine health related topics, be sure to check out the live and on-demand section of Feedstuffs 365, as well as our National Hog Farmer website. For Feedstuffs and National Hog Farmer, I'm Ann Hess.